army against their will. They also collected high taxes and rents. People in Germany had no religious freedom. Germany and the people. There was no single country called Germany. It was just a big group of land that spoke German. There were many farms and farmers in Germany, and there were famines when the crops failed.
There were many Germans coming to America, and the earliest immigrants came in the colonial time. In the 1740 to 1759, more ships came than in the early 1700s. And when the 18th century steamship was invented, it narrowed down the trip time to 2 to 4 weeks instead of 1 to 2 months. And in the 1860s, Germany had the most immigrants from one country. In the 1880s, 1.4 million Germans immigrated.
Why the Germans left Germany? The Germans left Germany because the nobility had ruled. Germany was made of different regions. They were all ruled by nobles. It was never just one country. It was the nobility could force people into the army against their will, and the Germans had to practice regional religions. Say if they were Catholic and their regional religion was Jewish, they had to practice Jewish religion. And it was difficult for farmers at the time because there were small land parcels. Because as the family divided, the father had to keep splitting up between the sons, the land, so that kept getting smaller and smaller. The farmers also started. They couldn't make a living off of of their crops because there were droughts and crop failures, and the farmers were fed up with this, so they heard about the land in the U.S. that was available, and they went and they most likely used the Homestead Act, which gave Midwest lands to the settlers under the conditions of willing to live there and take care of it. They had also heard good reports about America, the Germans, like it was the land of opportunity, as in there were jobs available, and there was land available, and they could just start a new life, basically.
Why the 48ers left? The 48ers were the first wave of German immigrants. They came in 1848. They came because they were fighting for democracy, and the nobility won. So they were afraid that the nobility would kill them all, so they came to America. They also came because America already had a democracy. There were 5,000 to 10,000 Democrats came to America. Most 48ers were scientists, artists, writers, lawyers, ministers, and teachers. After they arrived, many continued their profession.
And Germany had a lot of redemptioners, and redemptioners were people who didn't have money for a ticket and were still allowed to go to America. But in America, they had to rely on friends or family to pay for the ticket, and if their friends or family couldn't pay, the captain sold the contract that they had made with the captain, saying that they would pay their fare when they got to America, to someone in America, and they would work for them for a certain number of years, mainly 7. And it was pretty much the same thing as the indentured servant system. And I'm also going to tell you about the journey. And a lot of Germans came because they had more money than most people, so they could travel in first and second class, not the steerage, which was at the bottom of the ship. And on the ship there were really bad storms, and people thought the ship was going to fall apart. And there were sicknesses and diseases. On the early sailboats, it was 1 to 2 months of a trip, and then it was dangerous, and people were eager to leave the ship. And the ports were so busy back in Germany that they made small towns. And on the ship, a lot of people died, and like I said before, the 18th century steamships helped later.
I'm going to talk about how the Germans arrived in America. The Germans had usually arrived in New York, and they liked to stay around the ports because if they were waiting for someone or something. They also liked to move in the upper Midwest, Baltimore, New Orleans, places around that area. The Germans were also in the Philadelphia area. They settled in Pennsylvania, and they were called the Pennsylvania Dutch. And Pennsylvania Dutch is basically, it's Deutsch, because the Germans said to the Americans, Deutsch, and that means, and the Americans thought it was Dutch, and it sounds like Dutch, so it was called the Pennsylvania Dutch, and it's actually the Pennsylvania Germans. And they also the Germans formed German towns, which were basically Chinatowns. You've probably heard of Chinatowns. It's like the Germans get together with each other, they get together, and they form a town of just Germans. It reminds them of home. The Germans that were farmers settled in the upper Midwest, and they tended to have more money, so they could afford moving around and getting new farmland, because sometimes the farmland went bad. The Germans went in the upper Midwest to farm, and the Germans also liked to stay with their friends and family, because those are who they knew best and who they trusted. The farmers usually lived in sod houses, and a sod house is basically a house made out of dirt and grass, and the dirt and some wood, and the dirt and grass acts as if it was cement or walls. They did this because there were no trees on the prairies. The Germans were educated, and they had skills like reading and writing, and the Germans were good farmers. They were good at they were skilled laborers, teachers, musicians, artists. They were good in the brewing industry, paper mills, and carpentry. And I'm going to talk now how the Germans were treated when they arrived. At that time, the immigration laws in America had favored the Northern Europeans, and Germany is in Northern Europe. And Germans were able to read and write, and that brought them respect, because if they were trying to be tricked or anything, they knew what they were saying and they could understand. The Germans tended to have more money than most immigrants because of their previous job in Germany, and the Germans were able to find good, well-paying jobs because of the skills, and they were educated well.
And there were many famous Germans, and some of them are Albert Einstein. He is a famous scientist, and he was also called the father of modern physics. And there's Babe Ruth. He was a famous baseball player for the New York Yankees. And Thomas Nast, he created the Republican elephant and was the artist for Harper's Weekly newspaper. And George Westinghouse was an inventor, and he invented the railroad brake, which was a handbrake for trains on the railroad, and it improved railroad safety a lot. I'm going to tell you about what the Germans did and what they brought. They brought many foods, such as pretzels, sauerkraut, wurst, and frankfurters. They also brought orchestras and German libraries. They brought their language, Deutsch, glass skyscrapers, car types as Audis. They helped make the first car. They started many factories. They helped in wars. They created German towns in the Philadelphia area, in the upper Midwest, and they started kindergarten and PE. And this is our skit. I hope you like it.